Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Lindsey Davis Stover, and happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. I am thrilled this evening to have a veteran with us, a good friend of mine, Kayla Williams, who's Director of Military Veterans and Society Programs at CNAS. Kayla, thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about what CNAS is and what you do for CNAS.
The Center for New American Security is a bipartisan think tank that focuses on doing bold and innovative research, and I'm really excited to be there after previously spending 8.5 years at RAND, which is another think tank, and then 2.5 years at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And at CNAS, my program, the Military Veterans and Society program, covers kind of the life cycle of those who serve. So thinking about who chooses to join the military and why, how the military can attract top-tier talent, how we can support service members and their families while they are serving in the military, manage their talent effectively and retain them, and then how we can ensure that they have an effective transition back into the civilian sector, and then support them as they return to their communities and continue to serve in new ways.
That's fantastic. I mean, you have had a career of service that started in the Army, also in government service as well. Tell us a little bit about what service means to you and why you originally decided to join the Army.
So I grew up in a family of modest means. My mom was a single mother, she was an artist, and we were on food stamps occasionally when I was a kid. So I grew up acutely aware of the fact that society had invested in me. And when I finished college, I worked for a couple years in the nonprofit sector doing fundraising for public TV and radio. And then when I lost my first job, I was trying to figure out what to do next, and I wanted to go to grad school. I didn't know how to pay for it. I wanted a challenge to do something really outside of my comfort zone. And I was just kind of flailing around trying to figure it out. And I stumbled upon the military, realized that the Army would give me access to the GI Bill so I could go on to graduate school. It was definitely something I didn't know I could succeed at, so it would be a challenge. And I learned that I could become a linguist, and so the Army would pay me to learn a foreign language instead of me having to pay somebody else to teach me one, which I thought was a great opportunity. Finally, it was a way for me to give something back to the country that had invested in me already. So I chose to enlist in the Army, do everything a little backwards. I already had a degree, but I enlisted. And I was actually at the Defense Language Institute learning Arabic on 9/11, which was definitely a moment of intense realization that my military career was going to be very different than it might have been otherwise. It was no longer a question of whether I would go to war, just when and where.
Right, right. And tell us a little bit about where you did serve.
I was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault, out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and took part of the initial invasion of Iraq in early 2003. Spent about a year total in the Middle East, where I was able to use the language skill, and had the great honor of also, in addition to doing the job I'd been trained to do of signals intelligence, I also got to go out and do combat foot patrols with the infantry in Baghdad and translate directly between the Iraqi people and U.S. troops, which was incredibly rewarding to see the result of my work in the moment. And then we moved farther north up to Talafar and Sinjar, where the Yazidis live, if you've heard about how they've suffered under the changes that have happened since I came home, which was, fascinating to learn more about this really ancient culture, and then to see what's happened since has been truly devastating to know that we couldn't do more to protect them from what they warned us was coming.
Right, right. And tell us a little bit, you have written 2 books about your experience, and you have just been incredibly honest with what the Army has brought to you in your life, and also the challenges too of having served. Can you talk a little bit about some of those challenges when you came home?
Sure. When I got back from Iraq, I realized very quickly that most people just don't know, or did not at the time know, what women were going through in our military. So coming back to the United States, where at that time the Atkins diet was this huge craze, and so everybody's like, I'm on a diet, so I can't eat that banana. I have to eat this bacon. And I was like, are you sure you're on a diet? It was very confusing, but also they just did not understand that I had been to war. Yeah. I had folks ask if I was allowed to carry a gun because I'm just a girl.
Wow.
At war, and other folks who asked if I'd been in the infantry, which was still not authorized under regulation at that time. And so I think that it really enhanced my feelings of isolation and not being understood by our country. And I chose to write my first book to help give a richer understanding of what women have gone through and what women's military experiences are like. I mean, we've heard about what it's like for men to go to war, going back to like the Odyssey and the Iliad, right?
Right.
But what are women doing? And I also met the man who became my husband while we were overseas. We didn't start dating. It's not like super romantic in combat, but he was severely wounded, and the challenges that he encountered trying to get effective care and recover from a penetrating brain injury and then subsequently developing post-traumatic stress disorder, we were both really driven to find ways to ease the path for those coming home after us. And it was very hard to decide to be completely honest about the worst experiences of living with somebody who had severe post-traumatic stress disorder. But we jointly decided that if honesty about our negative experience encouraged anyone else to get help, it was worth it. And so we chose to share the full range of experiences that we went through, even some that were very, very negative, and really hope that it helped policymakers change what they were doing and ensure that there were better systems and services for others coming home, and also encourage individuals to recognize that there is a new normal that can still be a life of service and meaning, and where we can still contribute to society if they go and get help.
Well, both you and your husband are so inspiring. And when your second book came out, I was at the time working for a lawmaker who has been a champion for military families and veterans. And I remember highlighting so many things in your book and giving it to him. And I think your honesty has informed so many policy changes and the way in which we're able to better care for veterans. And I think too, in many ways, it highlights what work we have left to do, which has been so inspiring to so many people. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks.
Now, you talked a little bit about when you came home, feeling a disconnect. And I know you recently sat on a panel hosted by the Washington Post where you had a really honest conversation with our friend Alex Horton about the disconnect. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because today is Veterans Day, and I think there's so many people in our country that want to show gratitude. And as humans, we show and receive gratitude in many different ways. And I do think having that honest conversation about the disconnect is important. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. When I came home, one of the other things that I heard from so many people was, oh, I just can't imagine what you went through. And I'll be honest, when I first got back, I agreed with them. I said, you're right, you just can't. If you didn't have your boots on the ground, you just cannot understand what we went through. And it was an amazing essay by Phil Cly in the New York Times called Failure of Imagination that really forced me to do some hard thinking about how I was contributing myself to the disconnect every time I said that. And recognizing that humans can imagine a lot of things, right? Like, if you've seen the movie Avatar, you can imagine fighting blue aliens on a distant planet. So surely you can imagine what our troops are going through right now on the other side of this planet. And so I really have taken it upon myself to try to call people out when they say, actually, I'm really convinced that you can imagine it if you try. Consume some humanities about this war, read some books, watch some films, documentaries, not just the shoot 'em ups, but some more more thoughtful films about this, go to art shows and listen to music and go to stand-up comedy shows and find ways to hear the voices of veterans themselves. Let yourself imagine. And the flip to that is that we veterans, to the extent that we're able to, need to be willing to tell our stories. And so I think to bridge that divide, I would encourage folks, instead of just saying, thank you for your service and letting it stop there, to say something more along the lines of, I'd love to hear about your service. Can you tell me where you were stationed? Can you tell me about some of the folks you served with? And hear our stories with a sense of openness and interest, genuine curiosity about where our country has sent its own people to go and fight on its behalf.
And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, asking questions, while it can be sometimes uncomfortable for people to ask, and maybe uncomfortable too to answer, it's so important that we learn from each other, because we have to somehow bridge that gap that I think still exists right now, with less than 1% of our country serving in the military. The gap could potentially be even bigger in the future, and so starting to bridge that is really important. And your honesty has gone a long way in helping us do that. I'd like to ask you a little bit about other ways in which, we hear all the time, a grateful nation, right? When you're a veteran and when you've served and sacrificed, what does that mean to you? What does a grateful nation really mean to you?
That's a tough question. I feel, especially on Veterans Day, because to be quite frank, often I feel as if it's been a kind of hollow gratitude with not even bumper stickers, but yellow magnets that you can pull right off without even scratching your paint. And this gratitude that is very much like, thanks for doing that so I don't have to, while not sharing the sacrifice, not sharing the burden. Elliot Ackerman on last week put it really poignantly when he talked about how we have been at war for so long, but in an all-volunteer force, so there's no threat of a draft, and we also aren't even paying for the war as we go through increased taxes. It's been through deficit spending, passing the cost of this war on to our children and our grandchildren. Nobody other than those who are serving is being asked to pay for these wars today.
Well, let's finish that when we come back after commercial. Again, we have Kayla Williams with us. Please stay tuned.
So, I just moved in with his family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school. Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
No.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Lindsey Davis-Stover, and we're continuing our conversation with Kayla Williams. Kayla, before we went to commercial break, we were talking about the disconnect of those who have served and civilians, and you made a really good point about talking about how we have paid for these wars by adding to our deficit. And so essentially, future generations will continue to pay for these wars. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Because as a country, what can we do? What should we be doing to answer that call and also to prepare future generations? Because I do feel like we are raising some activists in our future generations.
I mean, number one, I think that we should raise taxes to pay for the wars right now. I mean, I think it's unprecedented to be this extreme in our unwillingness to pay for a conflict, especially one that is dragged on for this long. So that needs to happen right away. And also, my thoughts on how we need to prepare future generations are probably go beyond this single program, but I'm deeply concerned about the fact that the domestic policy decisions that we're making are leaving us with future generations that are not going to be able to serve. Only 1 in 4 young people is even eligible to join the military today. 3 out of 4 young people is ineligible to access into the military due primarily to obesity, criminal records, and lack of high school diploma. Those are the top 3 disqualifiers. So as part of that disconnect, I still often run into people who assume that it's the prior era of join the army or go to jail, or only folks with no other options go into the military, and that's just not true today.
Right.
Today, college recruiters and military recruiters are going after the same population, and the very poorest segment of Americans is least likely to be qualified to join because of these societal and structural problems. So in terms of preparing our future generations, we need to resolve our domestic policy problems so that we have a population that is healthy and educated enough to serve, and we've stopped the school to prison pipeline that is holding other people back.
Absolutely. And I think too, as we work to bridge this gap, it's so important that our lawmakers understand the decisions they're making when they send young men and women to war, and understand the responsibility we have as a country to take care of those who have served when they come home. And can you talk a little bit about that policy-wise? And do you feel like as a country we're moving in that direction to really understand what that means, or do you feel like the divide between our policymakers is getting bigger?
I think it's continuing to grow. When it comes to the tail costs of war that we accrue for those who are injured or we will have to care for in the long run, we still, as far as I know, have on the books of the Department of Veterans Affairs the dependent of one Civil War veteran who continues to draw a pension. So he married very late in life. His children were in some way disabled and unable to work, and so they continue to get his pension this long after the end of the Civil War. So when we think about the tail costs of today's conflicts, with increased life expectancies today, how long into the future are we going to be paying for these conflicts? And we need to make sure that our policies are aligned with best practices in making sure that we're getting people early interventions that are going to set them up to be able to continue working as long as possible. It's a very different era. It's not like folks are just going back to the farm, and we have to really reconsider what wellness means and how folks can continue to be as well as possible for as long as possible, those who have the capacity. And how can we support them in innovative and creative ways that will maximize their well-being and their family's well-being in the long run, instead of kind of thinking of it as this dichotomous, like, oh, you're disabled and therefore you can't work at all, or you're fine and why do you need anything? Like, how can we find more creative ways to address this?
That's interesting. Now, let's talk about being a woman veteran, because you have been very open about your experience as a woman veteran. And I know it is one of the largest or fastest growing population, veteran population today. Talk a little bit about your experience. And I ask because we have so many women on this show, and I love learning about whether they're leaders in politics or in academics or business, how it's been different for them as a woman. Can you speak to that as a veteran?
When I was in the military, there were a number of places where I was the only woman in the room, or on the side of the mountain, or in the truck, or whatever it may be. And it's been the same when I've entered veteran spaces, that there are times when I'm the only woman in the room. When we go places and people walk up to my husband and thank him for his service, and he says, "My wife served too." And folks say, "Oh, okay, so tell me where you served to him." And he's like, "I served in Iraq, as did my wife." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, so what did you do in the war?" And he's like, "I did this." My wife can tell you about what she experienced. And this just kind of glazed disconnect of not registering that I'm a vet. I went to war. I went outside the wire. I had similar experiences to many others who have gone to war before me, and being a woman didn't mean that I lived in some cloistered special environment. That sense of not being recognized even has extended to going to veteran service organizations sometimes. I was at a conference of a VSO. I was a guest speaker. I'm wearing the credentials that say that I'm there for the conference. I'm carrying the swag bag. And in an elevator, an elderly gentleman said, "Did you know this is a conference for veterans?" I was like, I do. I am. Yep. Thank you. And that just gets exhausting to feel like the same way that I had to prove myself when I was in the military, I still have to prove myself as a veteran. And it's the double burden of feeling that I represent not just myself, but all women is draining at times. I've chosen to just own it and recognize that I have to do it. And it's easier as I'm older. I think I have found that having a few more lines gives me a little more credibility on certain things as well. But it does become really draining. Luckily, many of the battles that I was involved in fighting earlier, we've actually accomplished, and so I don't have to answer quite as many ridiculous questions as I did when we were still out talking about why the combat exclusion policy should be lifted, or why Don't Ask, Don't Tell should be repealed. You know, those conversations are largely over, though there's always this fear they're going to come back.
Right.
But I mean, I've literally had people ask questions about, like, how can women handle it, and like, being in austere environments where there's no indoor plumbing. I'm like, do you understand that half the world's population doesn't have indoor plumbing?
Right.
If women died without showers, we would not have survived long enough as a species to invent them.
Yes.
Like, you know, women have climbed out Mount Everest. Women go camping. Like, women are affected by war all over the world, even if they're not combatants. But having to have those fights over and over and over, to hear them come back up in the news is incredibly frustrating. One of the things that has been most rewarding for me has been developing relationships with other women veterans who genuinely understand and who are incredibly supportive, who get subtle references and know exactly what I've been through, and call me on my nonsense if I'm being a little ridiculous, because they are not afraid of me, right? And are very, very willing to just be very blunt and direct, and have been incredibly supportive through the adoption of my son and the birth of my daughter, and just really rallied together. We support one another now through divorces and cancer and everything as a group. And it's been deeply, deeply enriching and rewarding to have that special relationship with other women vets in my life.
So important, absolutely. Just to have some friends that understand what you're going through and you can lean on. I think that's incredible. Now, you were previously the director for the Center for Women Veterans and a senior executive position at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And you did some incredible work with the center, just bringing awareness. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges. When it comes to healthcare, receiving benefits from the VA, the challenges are different for women in many cases. Can you talk a little bit about what those challenges are?
So I believe, based on all the data that I've seen, that at this point, women vets are taking advantage of their VA, Veterans Benefits Administration benefits, at equal or higher rates to men. So we use our GI Bill benefits at slightly higher rates, and when we use them, we graduate at slightly higher rates. We are using our home loan guarantees at equal rates, and in that way, I think VA has done a great job of doing outreach to younger women sooner. The Transition Assistance Program, much maligned as it is better than it was, and is a great way to help folks understand that VA is there. On the healthcare side, it's been more challenging. So women are about 16% of, maybe 17% of the active force. We're around 10% of the veteran population, but we're maybe 7.5% of the VHA, Veterans Health Administration, user population. So women are not using their VA healthcare at equivalent rates. And that can be because in the past, when we went in, it wasn't a very welcoming environment. And making up that lost ground has been challenging for the department, which has done amazing work. And at this point, the care is really quite good. There have been outside assessments, including by RAND, where I used to work, and others that show that VA provides care that is equal to or better than care in the civilian sector to an older, sicker, poorer population at lower cost. So VA is providing very good care. That's even true for gender-specific care. The rates of mammograms and cervical cancer screenings within VA are higher than those in among women who have private insurance, who use the military healthcare system, or use Medicare, Medicaid. So VA is doing a great job of ensuring that women get their gender-specific care when recommended. And this is a good news story that women don't know. And there have definitely been challenges about environment of care. It's hard when you're that small of a minority, and VA is working diligently to improve that. Some medical centers have women's clinics that are specifically designed for women. Others have days at the general primary care clinic that are designated for women, and there are other models to try to ensure that women are getting care that they need in a comfortable environment. But it is challenging when you have been, less than 10% of a population for many, many years, to even ensure that providers catch up and understand what they need to be doing and how they can provide that gender-informed care.
That's right. Well, please stay with us. We're going to continue this discussion with Kayla Williams on Veterans Day, the importance of honoring our veterans, both with our words, but also as a country. Please stay with us.
We are neighbors and best friends.
I love my sister.
My heart doesn't see race. Love is love.
Our family is no less than any other family.
Open road, here comes the Heffley family.
Whether it's a short trip or a long haul.
Estimated time, 47 hours.
They will beg.
You're hungry? I'm happy to provide.
They will plead.
Deep fried butter on a stick.
But whatever you do, don't wimp out.
Now you're talking.
Make them buckle up.
He can't hurt.
Remember, safety first. Cheese curls second.
Are you orange?
Eva Marie smoked 12,000 packs of cigarettes over 15 years. She quit and Now there's a new lung cancer screening that could save her life. You stopped smoking. Now start screening. No matter how much you smoked, early detection could save you. Talk to your doctor or learn more at savedbythescan.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Lindsey Davis Stover. And on this Veterans Day, we're continuing our conversation with Kayla Williams, who's the Director of Military Veterans and Society Programs at CNAS. Kayla, thank you again for being with us this evening.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
Well, I'd like to pick up where we left off, really talking about women veterans. And as you mentioned before, 10% of veteran population, but roughly 7% of that population receives care at the VA.
7% of the population of veterans who goes to VA for care is women.
So women. I see, yes.
It's a complicated...
No, but a small, relatively small number. And
which has tripled since 2000. So there's been a rapid growth.
So are you finding that the younger generation of veterans are more apt to go to VA for care in general, and also the women veteran population?
Yes, I think that we are more likely to understand that we're veterans and understand that we're eligible for care. A lot of folks still have this perception of veterans as only meaning combat veterans, which is not necessarily true, although the list of eligibility requirements for VA is extremely complicated.
Yes.
Especially for those who have served in the Guard and Reserves. Eligibility standards are very, very confusing. But women like me, I've been to war, I know that I'm a vet, so I understand that I should at least consider VA. Whereas women who served only in peacetime may be less likely to, have that deep understanding and automatically head in. So we've also seen improvements on the part of veteran service organizations and others to reach out to women and tell them that they might be eligible and that they should think about VA care. So we've definitely seen improvements on outreach and uptake, and more women who are going in to use VA, which I think is fantastic, in part because I mentioned before just the higher quality care overall, more culturally competent care, where VA providers understand that women may have experienced sexual trauma in the military, and that is very strongly associated with developing post-traumatic stress disorder. VA has evidence-based care. VA providers understand the risk of suicide and know that the rate of suicide has been climbing faster among our veteran population than among other segments of American population, though it's climbing throughout Americans. And VA providers are also more likely to know that it's been climbing extremely rapidly among women veterans. Women vets who don't use VA. It's stayed flat among women veterans who do use VA. And it's that cultural competence and understanding that women veterans are more comfortable with lethal means like firearms. And VA does things like passes out free gun locks, and will have some of these conversations a little more freely than civilian providers who don't even know to ask me if I served, much less ask about whether or not I own a weapon and offer me something like a gun lock so that it can be safely stored.
That's incredible. We've had discussions before that many women don't initially self-identify as veterans, and I may be projecting this, but I feel like women, we multitask and think of ourselves as so many different things: mother, friends, wives, entrepreneurs, business leaders, academics. What is your take on why some women may or may not just automatically self-identify as a veteran?
Women who served in previous eras in particular were either explicitly or implicitly told that they weren't real veterans.
Wow.
And unpacking that and owning, no, I am a real veteran, that alone can be hard.
That's a lot to unpack.
And for women who have gone into a VA and had a negative experience in the past, to overcome that and be willing to go back in, to to stand up and claim your veteran identity when people have questioned it over and over in large ways and small for many years can be very difficult and exhausting. And that's one of the reasons that I try to do it very blatantly and loudly, because I want to make it easier for other women. But I definitely see that challenge of lack of self-identification as being more pronounced in older women, and I'm much more concerned about them. Older women veterans are less likely to be married and less likely to have had children, so they may not have that family support as they age. So having a strong Department of Veterans Affairs here to support them as their health needs change is going to be even more important.
Wow, absolutely, absolutely. And on the topic of healthcare and care for women veterans in general, I know we've talked about in the previous segment how VA has really come a long way in a short amount of time. Talk a little bit about what challenges are still there and what policy changes we still need to make as a country.
VA has recently launched an end harassment campaign that's really important because across the country, it seems like roughly 1 in 4 women vets acknowledges that they have experienced sexual harassment at a VA medical center.
1 in 4.
Usually by other veterans as patients. So some of the same challenges that we experienced while we were serving in the military with sexual harassment can then continue into the healthcare setting.
Right.
And that's an ongoing challenge, how to help veterans understand what type of behavior is not acceptable and help women veterans and male allies understand what they can do if they experience or witness bad behavior, and help employees understand what options are available to them as well to keep it a safe and welcoming environment for all. In terms of other policy changes, in order to serve all who have served, I believe that it is time for VA to update its regulations and begin providing gender confirmation surgery to transgender veterans with untreated gender dysphoria. It is the standard of care that is accepted by the entire medical community, and so the fact that VA does not provide this medically necessary treatment is completely unreasonable and must be changed immediately. There are also a few ways in which VA is not providing equitable reproductive health care to women veterans. So under the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare, private health insurance is required to pay for birth control, and women do not have to pay a copay for birth control. VA is exempt from many of the requirements of the ACA, and so women veterans, who again skew somewhat poorer than non-users, VA users skew poorer than non-users, may be required to pay a copay for their birth control.
I did not realize that.
Yes.
Wow.
Which they would not have to do if they had private insurance. So that is an inequity between women vets and women non-vets that I think should be changed immediately. Also, women veterans are barred by VA regulation from abortions and abortion counseling in all cases, with no exception for rape, for incest, for life endangerment of the woman. No exceptions. So it goes beyond Hyde.
Right.
And again, not only barring abortion, but also abortion counseling with no exceptions.
So women in federal conversation, right?
Women in federal prisons who have been raped can receive an abortion. But as a woman veteran, if I were raped and went to VA, they would not be able to provide this medically necessary care. So again, this is an inequity between VA and other systems of care that I think is completely unfair and unreasonable for our women veterans. In addition, VA by regulation is not supposed to provide IVF or in vitro fertilization, and Congress has mandated that VA begin doing that, but the specifics of that are very, very narrow. It's limited to those who are married and who have their own gametes, so their own eggs and sperm. So you can't use donor eggs or donor sperm. So if you were wounded that severely that you don't have your own eggs or sperm, you are not able to use a donor. Or if you are in a homosexual marriage or relationship, you are not able to use this benefit. So another instance where I think the regulation needs to catch up and stop being inequitable in serving some of our veterans, but not all of our veterans.
Wow. Do you feel like our lawmakers hear those concerns? I mean, are there champions on Capitol Hill right now who are taking up these issues and really being a champion for women veterans and the policy changes that should be made at the VA?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, Senator Duckworth has been front and center in being willing to take on some of these challenges. We've seen some other lawmakers who are really taking the lead on this, but some of these questions, like abortion and IVF, are going to be caught up in arguments that go far beyond VA and are going to be difficult for folks to get beyond, especially in what's a very fraught environment.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about the diversity in the military and among the veteran population, because I think for so many Americans, unfortunately, when you hear the word veteran, there is a perception, right, of maybe an older man with,
really good posture,
right? One of those
short
hats on, right? Short hair. I mean, there is a perception, right? And I think it's important as a country that we change that perception. Can you talk about the diversity we have right now, not just in the military, but in the veteran population?
Within the military, women are still a minority. We're only 16-17% of the military, but in terms of the racial ethnic makeup of the military, it is roughly representative of the United States, though some groups are slightly underrepresented, others are slightly overrepresented, but roughly mirrors the makeup of the population. Interestingly, among military women, diversity is even more pronounced. So white women are, the last time I checked, at least in the Army, a plurality, but not a majority among women. So there is a huge amount of diversity, and that carries over into the veteran population. Women veterans skew younger than male veterans by about 15 years, so median age of, I think, 50 compared to 65 for men. And we are also more ethnically diverse as a population. We also have, of course, LGBTQ veterans and a huge amount of diversity on our political thoughts and our career paths and where we live and what types of families we have. Really, just as America is incredibly diverse, so are its veterans, which is part of what makes us strong as a country.
Absolutely. And I love hearing that, because I do think there is that perception out there that we have to shatter. Because you're right, veterans are serving in so many different ways now in their communities when they come home. And you had mentioned before, going back to the farm, right? Well, no, they're running for office. They're starting businesses. They're active in the community. So I think just really shattering that old perception that so many Americans still have of what a veteran looks like, right?
Right, absolutely. And we volunteer at higher rates. We vote at higher rates. We're more likely to belong to neighborhood associations. We really do come home and continue to serve our communities in new ways.
That's fantastic. Well, please stay with us. We are going to finish our final segment this evening and continue to talk about the important role and sacrifice veterans play in our country. Please stay with us.
Old man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We? Go to the door, ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go. See ya. Remember me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are. Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about pretty top fight. Nothing very nice. Homeless mind.
can prevent wildfires. Fire!
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Lindsey Davis Stover, and we're continuing our conversation on Veterans Day with Kayla Williams, who is the Director of Military Veterans and Society Programs at CNAS. And as we were finishing the last segment, Kayla, we were talking about the diversity among the veteran population and how important it is to change those perceptions of what traditionally many Americans have thought as veterans. And your honesty and openness is doing a lot in helping change those perceptions.
Thanks.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the role of veteran family members and caretakers. It is something I feel like that doesn't get talked about a lot. And I know we both were at the Elizabeth Dole Foundation seminar and gala, and they do a great job of highlighting the importance of caretakers. But as a country, talk a little bit about that sacrifice and maybe some things that we could do better.
I'll talk a little bit about my own experience. My husband sustained a penetrating traumatic brain injury in Iraq, subsequently developed post-traumatic stress disorder and depression and substance use disorder. Those four things unfortunately co-occur more than you'd like to know. And it makes some sense when you're struggling with these other symptoms. It's really easy to turn to, say, alcohol to try to numb those feelings. It's really hard on families to deal with these challenges, but also with the shame that's associated with some of those problems. And for me as a caregiver, I would get angry at behavior that was clearly unacceptable, even though I understood some of the root causes, but then feel deeply guilty that I was angry at a war hero. Sure. And figuring out how to take care of myself so that I could continue to care for my husband in the long term, figuring out how to set healthy boundaries and encourage him to get the help that he needed instead of just stagnating. These were all really difficult and fraught steps along the way. Last year, my husband then also had a seizure, which is more common among those who have had brain injuries. And he was home with our kids. So in addition to me being a caretaker, my 8-year-old daughter saw her dad have a seizure and had to run and get a neighbor to call 911. And realizing that it wasn't just me, it's our whole family that's going to be affected by this forever was just a definite moment where it hit me again that there are these ripple effects from the wars and from injuries that are sustained in war that go on into the generations and out in space and time. It's no longer just our family, it was our neighbors, it's our county that had to send an ambulance, it's everyone that had to step in because you can't drive for 6 months after having a seizure, so we needed to lean on other people that much more. And helping folks understand that when it comes to caregiving, there are a lot of different levels, right? There are folks who are caring for those who are never going to be functionally independent, folks who need help with many activities of daily living, feeding themselves and clothing themselves and bathing themselves. And there are other folks like me who I'm lucky enough that my husband is doing very, very well in many ways, but certain more challenging long-term things are still struggles for him. Something like planning for retirement and managing a budget and not just cooking a meal, but figuring out a menu of nutritionally balanced meals for an entire week for a family. These are complicated, kind of intellectual tasks that many folks are stepping up to fulfill as caregivers. And the caregiver population is huge. They're taking a huge burden off the government as well by stepping up and taking care of their family members. And they're diverse. We have parents caring for children, spouses caring for one another, children caring for their parents, siblings caring for one another. It's a heavy burden, and I don't know that we have fully caught up to how diverse that population is and how we can support those, especially who aren't in a traditional, like spouse relationship or parent-child relationship. How do we accommodate those who are caring for loved ones who don't have a formal relationship in the same way? And the Dole Foundation has done just absolutely amazing work in raising awareness about the burdens that are being carried and the needs that exist. VA now has a caregiver benefit. They can provide respite care. They can provide training. They can step up and help in other ways. And while originally that was limited to those injured after 9/11, that is eventually being rolled out to serve others as well, which could not happen soon enough, because we know that some of these wounds of war can become more significant, more burdensome as folks age. And some of the challenges, some cancers related to toxic exposures, for example, may not even develop for decades. And so making sure that those who served in Vietnam were exposed to Agent Orange, for example, are going to be able to get the same level of support and care and benefits, and their loved ones will as well, is really important.
That is important. From the perspective of a caregiver, what advice would you give other caregivers out there that are really serving their loved ones right now?
I think it's really important to not isolate yourself, to reach out and have connections with others who understand, and to be willing to accept some help. I think
it's hard to do.
It's hard to do, and especially women are, I think, trained and socialized to think that we should be able to carry all of those burdens of the home alone, and that's just, it's not true, and we can't do it. I would also urge caregivers to be compassionate to themselves, to recognize that it's okay to have a lot of complicated feelings, as long as you're doing the right thing. I've been to therapy a few times, and there's a particular type of therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, which, unlike cognitive behavior therapy, which talks about these thoughts that may not align with what's happening, you're having like irrational thoughts in a way that you need to realign. Acceptance and commitment therapy acknowledges that sometimes things are really terrible, and how can you live in accordance with your values, no matter how challenging things are around you, using techniques like mindfulness. And for me, that was really helpful. To, instead of having somebody say like, "Oh, you're having these automatic reactions that don't make sense," it's like, no, sometimes your situation is objectively terrible. And so how can you live in accordance with your deeply held values, no matter what's happening around you?
Right. And you talked a little bit about that self-care and how important that is. And can you talk a little bit about, if there is a caregiver out there who is looking for a resource or a community, not to isolate themselves, where can they go to get more information and more help?
I found that there are a plethora of different organizations that align with what folks' individual interests are. So for me, when things were really bad a few years ago, I started just running away from my feelings. I'm kind of kidding, but I started just actually going running. And like, that was helpful for me. And there are organizations like Team Red, White, and Blue, where you can get together and run as members of a community.
That's great.
And there are lots of community organizations that align with your interests. If you love quilting, I'm sure that there are quilters out there, whatever it may be, finding folks who do something that you love, that you can do in the company of others. My husband loves an organization called Project Healing Waters. They go and do fly fishing. So really, whatever folks are interested in, there is going to be some organization that will be open and welcoming that they should explore. Specifically for caregivers, you mentioned Dole Foundation, also the Red Cross, I think, has some resources. Blue Star Families is available for families and is rolling out additional resources for caregivers as well. So there are a number of organizations out there that folks should check out.
That's great. Well, as we kind of come to an end on the show on Veterans Day, tell me a little bit about what Veterans Day means to you personally.
When I first came back from the war, I felt like a woman who just happened to have gone to war, and I didn't self-identify immediately as a veteran either. We talked about that a bit earlier. We went on our honeymoon to Europe, and we were in a World War II exhibit in Paris, and I saw this equipment that was shaped like mine, but different materials. Like, helmets are still shaped pretty much the same. The canteens look the same shape. And when I saw that gear, it hit me that I had something in common with all of those folks, with everyone who had gone to war before me, that I was in fact a member of a community of veterans. And it really resonated deeply with me, and was when I started to connect with Veterans Day and had the great privilege to be in London near Veterans Day, and everybody wears a poppy. And that also just struck me as the way in which an entire country remembers and comes together to commemorate. And it's become more meaningful to me through time. And I try to find ways that I can connect with myself and my family. So today, my husband and I went hiking to just spend some time in nature and with each other. And I really think it's important for people to find a way that is meaningful to them and their connection to themselves or the veterans in their lives.
Well, and for those of us who aren't veterans, how's the best way we can show our gratitude to those of you who have served?
I think the best thing you can do is to vote. We have been willing, as those who have served, to put our lives on the line in support of the Constitution and our democratic values. And so the number one thing that you can do is to exercise that right by voting every year in every election. Also, take part in your civic associations, be a part of your community, and find ways to serve and support others, to approach the other members of your community with compassion and caring, to be a decent person.
Right, right. That is one of the best answers, And I know, as we spoke of previously, the importance of asking questions and really understanding and getting to know those that have served in your community.
Absolutely. And don't ask, have you ever killed anyone? But do ask things about, what did you do while you were in the military? Where did you serve? Who did you serve with? People love to tell stories.
That's fantastic. And I love your answer. The best way to thank a veteran is to vote and stay active. Thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you to all those who have served our country. Good night.